Right. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining our April community call today. We're going to have our third training session today. So before we go on with the training session, which today will completely dedicate to doing a recap of the SOS challenge tutorials that's been happening over the few weeks so far. So it's sort of a crash course for those guys who haven't had the opportunity to be in the tutorials live. So before we go on to that, we're just going to highlight some APAC publications that was featured in the Odyssey community call last month. And we're also going to highlight some upcoming Odyssey events as well. So first, the APAC publications, right? So two publications were featured from APAC. So one was from the University of Hong Kong by Hao Luo. I hope I said that name correct. So she and her team published a study on COVID-19 on the rate of antipsychotic drug prescriptions among people living with dementia during the COVID pandemic. So it's been published in the JAMA Network, JAMA Psychiatry journal. If you want to take a look, please visit the URL here and have a look at the journal. It's free, by the way, guys. But probably most of you, it's free anyway, since you guys are affiliated to a academic institution. So the next publication is from Cheongsu, or from Asia University of our beloved Korea. And he and his team published a study on adolescent ADHD with comorbid depression. And it's a study focused on safety outcomes of certain drug classes used in these population. So also, if you are interested and you want to have a look, please visit the URL here and have a look at what they've published. If you have any questions, you can either direct to me or the study teams and get the conversation started. Yep, that's all for the APAC publications today. Moving on to the Odyssey events. So there's a lot of events coming up in the next few months. We have one right like tomorrow. So it's tomorrow during the work hours of the US, but unfortunately for the APAC times, it will be Friday night and moving on up until Saturday, the midnight of Saturday until 4 a.m. And 5 a.m. around this time for the APAC people. So that's the DEF CON. I'm going to get to the details in the next few slides. So that's the DEF CON happening tomorrow. It's a virtual event. I've also listed down some relevant URLs for you guys to visit in case you want to you guys want to learn more about the events. There's also the European Symposium and the APAC Symposium coming up in July. So at the beginning of July, there's the European Symposium. Mid-July, there's the APAC Symposium, which is going to be hosted in Australia. We've sent out a lot of emails on this already, so you guys should be aware. If not, now's your time to register because the registrations are up as well. So I will get to that in a few seconds. And last but not least, or most famous global symposium, right, is coming up in October. It's mid-October. I see that the venue has changed, Patrick. I don't know if the venue has changed recently, but my memories are telling me they were back then at Maryland and at Bethesda, right now, but it seems it's changed to New Jersey this time. So if you haven't been to the part of the US, I think it's a great chance to be there and meet all the great Odyssey folks there. So yeah, enough chit chat, right? The DEF CON, it's a one-day virtual event. It's focused. It's a very technical event that started last year. It's happening again this year. It's very focused on open source development, right? So there's two sessions that's gonna come. It's gonna progress. So the first session in the morning would focus around talks around these four topics here: open source economics, Darwin, Julia Hades, and open source governments. And in the afternoon, in the second session, there will be three parallel sessions led by different people and on different topics. So if you haven't got the invites, I think Craig sent out yesterday to everybody who's in the Odyssey teams. But if you haven't got the links, I've put down the links here so that you can join the event. It's the same link for session one and the first session of the first, I guess, sub session of session two. But there are different meeting links for the second subsession of session 2 and third subsession of session 2. Oh God, too many sessions in the word. It's almost hard to pronounce, but yeah, I made it. So yeah, guys, so if you're interested in the technical aspects and open source development within the OHDSI community, now is a good time for you to join. I think Patrick has left some comments in the chat about the DEF CON and how useful it can be for certain people within the community. Right, moving on. So the European Symposium, as I said, it's at the beginning of July. It's going to take place at the Erasmus University Medical Center at the Netherlands. Again, one of the days will be hosted on the steamship Rotterdam. So if you haven't had the honor to be on the ship, you go there, be on ship, it's fabulous. I'll be able to join their.
Is it me or is it Song has gone to a robot?
Yeah, I think some
Yeah.
some connection issue.
Song's a robot.
Oh my God, my machine is doing lagging. I hope I'm not lagging.
You're a robot.
Okay, now I'm back. It's normal for me. Am I good?
Yeah,
Now
so
it's good,
can you
yeah.
repeat everything about Europe because you went to a robot mode?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to do that quickly. Again, July 1st to 3rd, some of the events are going to take place at the Erasmus Medical University in the Netherlands, but the second half is going to take place on the steamship Rotterdam. So it's a big ship, not sheep, big ship. It's a cruiser, I think. And I haven't had the chance to be. Oh, am I doing it again? Okay. Yeah, ship, not sheep, and not. You got to be careful with the last letter there, right? Anyways, yeah, I haven't been there. I heard it's great. You can see a lot of photos if you go to the website for the symposium. So please, now is the time to register. The registrations are open at this link. And the agenda is not being announced yet, but I'm pretty sure the planning committee is very busy finalizing at this moment. So that's for the European Symposium, the APAC Symposium. Right. So it's July 13th to 14th. It's right after MedInfo. So if you guys are planning to join MedInfo, it's a good time for you guys to register for this event as well and join us at the University of New South Wales, where Nicole is. Where Nicole is at. Okay, I'm very cautious because I'm scared I'm going to do the robot thing again. So registrations are open at Eventbrite. One thing to emphasize is the seats for the tutorials are limited. If you want to be a part of the tutorials, you should reserve your seat now. We are not charging additional fees for participation in the tutorial. So it's a first come first serve basis. So the numbers might not look so competing at the moment, but you know, as time passes and you leave it at the back of your mind, you'll notice that you won't have a seat for the tutorial. So please keep a lookout on the event page at Eventbrite and register as soon as you have confirmation from your relevant organizations. And if you go to the symposium page, there's also the agenda up there, initial agenda, of course, subject to change depending on the discussions the planning committee has in the next coming few weeks. And last but not least, the Global Symposium also has their registrations open. Please visit. The abstract submissions, by the way, are also open for the Global Symposium. I forgot to point out that the abstract submissions for the European Symposium are also open until the end of this month. So there is still time for you to submit your submissions to the European Symposium and plenty of time for you to submit your abstracts to the Global Symposium. So that's all the news I have on OHDSI. If there are no questions from the floor, we'll just get right to the SOS tutorials recap. So before we give a recap on each of the weeks that happened in the past few weeks, I'm going to hand over the floor to Nicole, where she'll just give a brief overview of one of the 4 SOS challenge studies, the fluoroquinolone study, which is actually being led by the APAC community. So Nicole, do you want me to navigate the slides for you? we can't hear you, Nicole.
Rookie mistake. Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I wonder
There is a howling.
if everybody can mute themselves, maybe. Is that better? No.
Who is OHDSI? Okay. Could you do this again? Do that again. Could you speak again, Nicole?
Yep. Is that better? Yeah, that's better
Much
for me.
better.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to do just a quick overview of the SOS challenge around fluoroquinolones, and I'm doing this for Jack, who unfortunately did a whole day of lecturing yesterday and has lost his voice. So if there's any tricky questions, I'm sure he can utter a few words or along the way. But anyway, I will just give a quick overview of where we're at, where the study has come from. So the question that we're asking for this SOS challenge is fluoroquinolones associated with the development of aortic aneurysms or aortic dissections? And the ands and the ors there are going to be critical, as we'll see later on. All right, so next slide, thanks. So for those of you that are unaware of this study, we have presented it a couple of times, but fluoroquinolones are broad spectrum antibiotics, and they are indicated for a whole heap of different indications. So from urinary tract infections, GI infections, all the way up to really nasty bone and joint infections, as well as some pneumonia and septicemia and so on. So there's quite a few indications that these things are used for. So again, that's something critical that we've learnt in this challenge, is that the indication is quite important. So we've bolded their urinary tract infection because we've kind of narrowed down our target infection to urinary tract infections. And there's a whole heap of reasons for that we'll go into, I'm sure, during the overview. One of the other interesting things about fluoroquinolones is that their consumption is actually rising quite markedly in some countries. So there is this rise in the use of fluoroquinolones. Go to the next slide. It's good, though, that they are generally well tolerated and very effective treatment for infection. But there have been some rare side effects that have been kind of identified in the post-market space, and one of those is the risk of aortic aneurysms and dissections. Now, the mechanism itself is not really well understood, but the regulators have placed black box warnings on this issue, and many of the countries, probably all countries, have placed limitations on the prescribing of these medicines. The very interesting part about this whole sort of issue is that the quality of the evidence that was used to underpin those black box warnings was actually pretty moderate. It was based on observational studies. So there were 5 observational studies in a meta-analysis that was used to kind of respond with these black box warnings. And, you know, all of those studies, when we reviewed them, were very different in terms of the choices that they made on the active comparator or the follow-up, which patients they included, did they look at the overall class or individual quinolones, and if it was the class, which of the quinolones were included, the different study designs that were used as well. They all 5 had a different study design. So there was a lot of conflicting kind of results in there, not just the results themselves, but you know, the way that the analysis was done. And then there's also the issue here about confounding by indication. So is it the underlying infection that is associated with the outcome, or is it the fact that these patients are getting the quinolones? So it's a really interesting space to be looking at. So next slide. Have we got to the next? Oh, thank you. Whoops, did we skip one? Maybe you just head back one slide. Thanks, Sol.
I think there's.
Oh no, okay, got it. Yep. Okay, so that brings us to the primary research question. Does fluoroquinolones increase the risk of these aortic aneurysms or dissections within 1 year after exposure start? And like I said, we've narrowed ourselves down to the urinary tract infections. So for a patient with a UTI, what's the probability that they'll go on to have an aortic aneurysm or dissection following initiation of fluoroquinolone? So we want to characterize, we want to estimate, and we want to predict the risk of aortic aneurysms following use of fluoroquinolones. So next slide. Okay, I won't go through these in much detail, but the first thing is to really characterize the outcome. So what is the incidence and the time to event of these things following exposure? And like I said, this idea of incidence of the event has been something we've really discussed in the tutorial just recently. What are we actually trying to measure? The incidence of what? We've got two outcomes, the dissection and also the aneurysm itself. And we've had lots of discussion about, is it a composite outcome? Are the two independent, and how do they actually get recorded in the database itself? So we've had lots of discussions around how we actually define the outcome so that we can appropriately characterize the incidence of these events. Okay, so next slide. Nope, next slide, not coming.
I changed right away. There seems to be a lag.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's fine. The next slide is really just saying that once we've done this characterization, we want to do the estimation, the comparative effect between the quinolones and the risk of the outcome, and compared to the comparator antibiotics as well. So we can go to the next slide. So. No, anyway, next one is going to be around prediction. So as I mentioned, predicting the outcome. Here we go. Okay, so one of the other questions that we've been really focusing a lot on are the active comparators. So like we've narrowed to urinary tract infection, we're looking at the fluoroquinolones, but then we also want appropriate active comparators. And this has been something we've really had to understand as well, because there are different treatments in different countries. So what is the active comparator? I can't say these words, cephalosporins and penicillin. So we've had to sort of narrow down our active comparators. And yesterday in the tutorial, we just really had a look at some cohort characterizations where we were looking at differences between the countries in terms of what other medicines are used for the treatment of urinary tract infections in the outpatient setting. So I think that's where, if we go to the next slide, I think that might be all. Yeah, we can skip past this one. So this is prediction study. Yeah, so this is where we're at. So we're refining the clinical description right at the moment on the outcomes as well as the exposure. We've done some phenotype evaluation so far, and we've really had to think about our phenotype and refining our phenotype because of what we looked at with the cohort characterizations. And if you're not already involved, there's still time to get involved. You can execute the analysis in your data if you haven't already. So there's a package that you can run to create the cohorts and have a look at them and share them if you're able to. And we're still looking for collaborators to be involved in the study. So head to the website that's there, and if you want to join. So that's where we're up to at the moment. I'll hand over back to Song, and I think we'll go through some of those key tutorials.
Thanks, Nicole. I hope the slides are moving better now. Yeah, the first recap will be led by myself. So I'm just going to quickly go through the first tutorial, which actually focused on some housekeeping stuff on initiating a network study. So to summarize in a nutshell, right? So there are tutorials on the SOS Challenge website, but to summarize not tutorials, there are recordings on the SOS Challenge website. But to summarize the 40-minute tutorials into 5 bullet points will be, number one, you will need to you will need to be part of the OHDSI Teams environment, which is obvious. I hope all of you who are here are already part of this, but I'm quickly going to go through that. Number two, you need to set up a R environment because a lot of the OHDSI tools are dependent on R. Number three, you need to have a GitHub repository, which will be also within one of the OHDSI tools available. And number four is a study Teams channel dedicated for your study. I'm also going to quickly go through that. And finally, of course, the protocol and the manuscript, which will be essential documents for your study. So the first things first, right? OHDSI Teams. Surprisingly, you would expect everyone to be a part of the OHDSI Teams already, but there are many cases when people forward invites here and there. Since we don't really restrict people to be part of the OHDSI Teams environment, there are people who are actually joining our calls without being part of the OHDSI Teams. So if you aren't part of the OHDSI Teams already, you need to be a part of the Teams environment so that you can be active in a lot of the studies. So there you can apply to become a member of the OHDSI Teams using these forms. I'm just quickly gonna pop up the forms here. So if you click on the first form, it's a form for you to apply to the OHDSI Teams. If you click start, you need to enter some information about yourself as well as your email address, and then you'll get a notification that you've been added to the OHDSI Teams, and you can you can work under the Teams environment from then. And then the second form that's actually up there is a form where you apply to specific work groups that you're interested in, or specific studies or specific chapters that you're affiliated. For example, we are in the APAC region. If you are part of any of the regions here, you can click check and you'll be included in the work groups and the relevant teams that are created for each of the chapters or regions. So these are the forms that you need to fill out. Once that's set up, you're safe and sound within the OHDSI Teams and ready to be involved with the larger group. The next is actually installing R in your environment. There is actually a very detailed document that details all the steps that you need to go through in doing this. So when you click on this link, I'm also going to go through this briefly with you guys. So when you click on this link, you'll be led to this web page here. The very so the Hades is a bunch of OHDSI tool suites that we use for all of our analysis. The link that I've put up here is actually the R setup link here, right? So if you click on this, it will give you a step-by-step process in how to install R. R tools that's required to be installed in order to use the OHDSI packages, and also R Studio, which is a development platform that works on top of R, as well as Java, which many of our tool packages require. One thing to note here, guys, is some people just install stuff next, and finish, and sometimes that causes a lot of problems, especially for R, right? So, for example, for Windows, you need to make sure that you install just one instance of R that is relevant to your machine. So if you have a 64-bit machine, you should only install the 64-bit. You shouldn't refrain from checking the 32-bit option here. So again, pay attention to the instructions that are here. You really want to be cautious and paying attention to all the details, every little sentence that's here, because one thing you do wrong is going to essentially cause you to do everything all over again. So I've done this many times. I'm not a technical person. I don't pay attention to the details sometimes, and I happen to uninstall and install stuff all over again. So please don't make the same mistake. From a person who's already experienced this, it's not a very pleasant experience, right? You don't want to bother technical people for stuff for mistakes you make that you don't pay attention to the details. Anyways, I got carried away there. After you install R, what you need to do is, going back to the slides, you need to set up a GitHub repository, right? So GitHub is a place where it's a public place where you can share your code, you can share your changes, and you can decide among a group on what changes that you are going to implement into the final study package. So all network studies from OHDSI, we use GitHub. You need to reach out to an owner of the OHDSI GitHub and ask for a new repository to be created. One thing to note here is if you don't have a GitHub account, you need to create one so that you can be nominated as the study maintainer of the repository that is being created for you. So I'm not going to go through every single repository here, but I've listed down all the repositories for the SOS Challenge studies right now. I'm just going to go to the fluoroquinolone repository to give you, to show you what it looks like. So going back to the Explorer here, right? So if you click on the link, you'll be directed to this web page here. So it's a very technical website, right? Typical technical websites have black background with white font. So if you come here, you're going to see a lot of files here, which is related to the study. So sometimes all the R packages, all the R scripts or the SQL scripts, or any other relevant documents as well, right? The protocol perhaps, or the manuscript. These are going to be included in these folders here. And if you become a part of the GitHub repository, you can actually pull requests and fork these files so that you can work on these files by yourself and then merge those files to the master branch of this GitHub. I might be talking a bit too technical here. I might also not be 100% aware of what I'm talking about, but basically what GitHub allows you to do is it allows every single contributor of this study to work on changes to the study package individually, and then allow this to be merged into a central place, which is happening all within the GitHub repository right here. So if any of you have anything to add to that, please add. Otherwise, I'm just going to go and run away from my embarrassment. There you go. So after you have the GitHub repository, you need to request a study teams channel. This is sort of an important step because not all of the people are going to be signing up to GitHub. So the Teams channel is a more familiar or an easy place for people to get involved. So there's a lot of owners within the study, within the OHDSI teams. You can reach out to any one of them and they will create a channel for you. I've listed out all the Teams channels here for you. I'm just going to go to the fluoroquinolone one to show you guys what it looks like. So let me just drag this here, guys. So once you become a part of the teams, you're going to see a lot of the teams that you have been granted access to. And right now, the SOS Challenge Study Teams channels are actually available under the OHDSI teams. So if you go under OHDSI, on the left side, you're going to see a bunch of channels. And there you go. We have 4 channels here. And if you click on the channel that I just mentioned, the fluoroquinolone one, you can see that a lot of discussions are going on right now by the study teams and all the participants from the studies. You can hop on, you can read through, and you can quickly catch up what's going on. Another part to highlight here is the files tab right here, right? So by default, you'll be led to the post tab, but if you go to the files, you're going to see a lot of documents or relevant files that's being used for this study. So for example, the protocol is here, the manuscript is also here. If you click on each one of these, you're going to be directed to either to the Word file or for the manuscript, it's probably going to be the Google Docs because that's what we normally use for the manuscript within the OHDSI community. So the study teams channel is going to be the central place where everything about the study is happening. All the discussions are going to be here. All the calls relevant to the studies are also going to be scheduled within the study teams channel. So please keep an eye out if you're interested in joining the studies. The other SOS Challenge study teams channels are also there in case you want to be involved in them as well. One thing to note, these channels might be hidden for some of you. You need to unhide these channels. So if you click on the three dot button here, you can choose to hide or you can choose to make them visible and click on the show. So if you don't see them, it's probably hidden. So unhide it for those who don't see it. And going back, the last the last two parts of preparing for network study, guys. Again, you need a protocol because some institutions have certain regulations. They need to go through IRBs or EC approvals before they can run a certain study package. So you need to prepare a protocol. I've put a model example here for you guys to check out in case you guys are interested in studying a study yourselves, and you need to write up a protocol, but you need a example. And all the protocols are available for all four studies. The fluoroquinolone one is also available there. A lot of revisions are going on at the moment. If you have any area of expertise where you think you can contribute, now is your time to jump in, hop on, track changes on what you do, and help out with the larger study team. And last but not least, right, the manuscript, always the most painful process. If there is it's the most painful process. It's much easier if you start it early. If you have the protocol, there's some parts of the manuscript that you're going to be able to write up in advance. So do it early. Put it up on the Teams channel for people to hop on and make edits. You might want to use Google Docs because it's very, it enables simultaneous editing, and it also has some version control as well. So all the manuscripts for the manuscripts currently available for all the SOS challenge studies, I've put down here as well. They're also available within the Teams channel that I just showed you. So please, guys, get involved. If you're interested in initiating your own study, these are the steps that you need to follow. But right now, your interest and participation in the SOS Challenge would be greatly appreciated. So that's all I have prepared for today. I'm going to hand over the floor now to Xiaoyu, where she can go through quickly on the recap of the second SOS tutorial that happened. Xiaoyu?
Yeah, thank you, Song. I can hear an echo. Okay, thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. I will give a recap of the SOS Challenge Week 2 tutorial. In this tutorial, it presented what database diagnostics is, and it demoed how to create the profile for a given database and how to fill out the data diagnostics inputs. And it also explained in details like how to interpret the data diagnostic output for the SOS Challenge examples. And so can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so what is data diagnostics? Basically, it is an R package that allows us to determine which databases in the network have the elements required to answer a research question using only a set of aggregated summary statistics. So the bottom piece is actually is really the key here. It means that we can determine just based on the set of aggregated summary statistics which databases in the network have the elements required to answer a specific research question. Next. And how this tool works. So this slide shows that the process. Firstly, you run the database profile tool, which is part of the data diagnostic R package on your database locally. And each of the database will have a database profile generated. This database profile consists of aggregated summary statistics of your database. For example, that it contains the total number of patients in your database and the number of males in your database, or the number of patients by the year of birth. And then these database profiles are going to be shared with the OHDSI Coordinating Center, so who will aggregate the database profiles from all the databases participated in into one table. And from there, we can run the data diagnostics to just on the set of the summary statistics and using the input that you given for a particular study question. And data diagnostics tool then can output the information of every single database in the network, whether or not each of those databases is appropriate to answer your specific study question. And next. So here is a list of summary statistics included as part of the database profile. So which contains basically it contains the number of patient counts. So counts by different demographics and counts by standard concepts, by source concepts in all events tables like a condition occurrence or measurements. Yeah, next one. And in this slide, it shows that once you have the aggregated summary statistic of your database, and you can specify what elements of a study questions you need to know to run in order to run the data diagnostics tools. So in this page, it shows all the options available, but you do not need to fill up every single one on the slide in order to run a data diagnostic. In order to run a data diagnostics. The only mandatory variables on this page is the concept list for target. For target, that's something you must fill up before you proceed with the data diagnostic tool. And and another thing is that all the variables here are independent from each other. That means like you can restrict that you want patients to within certain age range or have like a specific gender, but you cannot specify any interaction between or among the among the different variables. I think the team is working on that to update the package, which will allow the intersection of the variables here. And next one. Yeah, the next slide is the input for one of the SOS challenge example. As you can see from the slide, it restricts the age to be at least 18 years old and at least 1 year of longitudinal follow-up in the database. It also specifies at the bottom, it also specifies the concept list for target and comparator drugs, indications, and outcomes. And on the right, it requires the qualified patients must have records from both condition and the drug domains. Yeah, next one. And the results from the data diagnostics tools can be viewed by a very interactive, shiny app or dashboard. So under the, there are two tabs on the top left. So under if you click the summary tab, then you can select the analysis you want to explore, and it will show at high level how each of the database performed against the analysis in terms of number of checks failed. So the zeros in green means that the database actually passes all checks set up for this specific analysis, which indicates that the database is a potential one for this specific analysis. And to learn more about which checks the database did not pass, you can click the drill down button. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, you can click the drill down button, and it shows like for each of the database which exactly checks that the database did not pass. And then if you click the view button next to each of the database, then which will give you the details about each checks, like the thresholds for that checks, etc. Yeah. And lastly, I want to highlight that the data diagnostic tool is going to go beyond the SOS challenge, and it will definitely benefit us while we are doing network studies by the OHDSI Coordinating Center. But you can also run it for your own databases locally, and it is a very efficient way to identify potential or appropriate databases to answer your specific research question. Yeah, that's all from my side.
Thanks, Xiaoyu. So the next tutorial on phenotype development and the following one on phenotype evaluation will be led by Atif, who's here. Hi, Atif. You want me to navigate through the slides for you like I did for Xiaoyu as well?
Sure. Yeah. Given we only have 18 minutes, I'll try to be as fast as possible. I just wanted to take a pause here and show how fast we've done all this work. So within 2 weeks, we not only went from getting all this together, identifying 4 topics, writing a protocol, identifying databases, and running this new data diagnostic packages to the point of building phenotypes all within 4 weeks. So I don't think that's something we can take for granted. And I just wanted to highlight the speed that this is going is only possible because of the work that's done through OMOPing this data and the tools that we have available. So week 3 and 4 was at the point of, now that we have these packages and we have these data sets, how do we build the right phenotypes to understand the exposures and outcomes built around each protocol? If you go to the next slide. So what Shayu just showed was we eventually were able to get cohort diagnostics to potentially identify data sets that have passed for us to do these studies. So the goal is, now that we know what we can run against, the question is, how shall we frame our cohorts that are possible to be built around these data sets? Next slide. So if you focus on the fluoroquinolone study, Christian and Gautam really talked about how do we build exposure cohorts and outcome cohorts. Christian went back to the basic idea of what we want to pick out in the study for exposures was the idea that we have this medication called fluoroquinolones, cephalosporins, and sulfamethoxazole. And the goal was to see how these antibiotics are used to treat different type of individuals, just like Nicole said. Next slide. So as we built the exposure cohort, the first thing we wanted to kind of look at was the ingredient of fluoroquinolone. If you click next again, so fluoroquinolone is a bacterial agent that's a group of antibacterials. So it encompasses a range of medications, all ending in ofloxacin. So we want to make sure that we include all of these in. The second step we want to note for this patient, for this medication, is the route of administration, because we're specifically focusing on UTI and respiratory. The route has to be systemic. So in addition to kind of creating the exposure of the ingredient itself, we have to be cognizant of picking the right type of route when we create the concept set. Next slide. So in the demo, as we go into Atlas, when we create this concept set, what we really have to be careful about is, as we kind of identifying the drug name itself, the box in red are things that we want to exclude out. So these are medications that are either solutions or ointments that meet the ingredient level specification, but are the wrong route of administration. The goal of creating this concept set is to include the ones that are both ingredient as well as correct route, and exclude the concept IDs and the descendants that are the right ingredient, but obviously the wrong type of route. Going to the next slide. So that was exposure cohort. So Gautam talked about the outcome itself. So for this, one of the specifications we were really looking at was aortic dissection and aortic aneurysm. This could be built just like we know, either as a diagnostic criteria, or even in terms of specific imaging, as well as other measurement codes. If you go on to the next slide. So what we really did as a group was identify key papers where these outcomes are defined. So what we generally narrowed down was there's potentially 2 flavors that these could be captured as we build the phenotype, either using a hospital inpatient admission with a primary diagnosis, or a hospital admission with any diagnosis that includes the primary specifications as well. Diagnostic imaging was questionable, primarily because 3 out of the 4 papers did not include them in their cohort definition. Next slide. So as we kind of go into Atlas and start creating the cohort definitions, the goal is to set what would be the entry event for this population. So there is identifying either the diagnosis or procedure codes, then including the next step of going into the inclusion criteria. In this case, it is an inpatient stay and primary diagnosis. We defined how long the patient would need to be staying in here to satisfy the inclusion criteria. And there isn't a cohort error specifically for the study itself. Next slide. So as we kind of talk through, again, this really small here, it makes more sense to go see it in Atlas, and I can share the link of these forward as well. For the cohort entry events, they created a condition code, a procedure code, and an observation code around the same type of outcome. When we went into including the inclusion criteria, each of these were defined based on inpatient admissions as well as the idea of having a primary or any diagnoses. Next slide. So those were primarily how we defined the cohort development criteria itself. This week was phenotype evaluation, where JPEG and Evan really talked us through how do we create good phenotypes and how do we evaluate them using the tool sets that we have. The first set of these slides was really looking at the R package that JPEG had gone through, and what I'll go through is an overview of the steps that he showcased on what our community could do in walking through and creating these packages ourselves. All of these, I believe, Patrick, is available on JPEG's phenotype slide, so they should be able to get to the code themselves. Next slide. Yeah. So the first setup, just like Song pointed out, was to set up R in your local environment. As we go through, we go into Atlas and pick up the appropriate concept sets that we define to create and set up a study environment. As we do that, the next step is to start creating the connections of the environment itself, defining what a CDM version is, where the database is stored, and how and what folder would the results be stored in. Next slide. As we move forward, then we go forward to generating the cohorts itself. These again would be based on the code specifications that we'd set up for each of the studies. These could potentially take long depending on how the studies are being created. And as they're done, these either could be saved as an SQL database or could be generated into a Shiny app itself. All of these codes, again, are available in the file that JPEG had shared that anyone in the group can run as is. There's also a resource repository that's shared where we can go in and see how all of these could be done by each group. Next slide. Evan really talked about, as we think through this clinically, now that we've built the analytical cohorts, are we really thinking through creating homogeneous cohorts that really answer the questions that we have? So are we including the right kind of people? Are we ignoring people who should be included? Are we including too many wrong kinds of individuals? Next slide. Evan really focused on aortic aneurysm and aortic dissection. One of the first components that he picked up was the idea of creating a composite score. The hard part of creating a composite score is there's a lot of overlap between these three indications. So unless we account for these overlaps, creating mutually exclusive composite scores becomes really hard. The next slide. Yeah. There's also the idea of, if you go one step back, Song. Yeah. There's also the idea of condition occurrence. Depending on if this is a primary diagnosis or secondary tertiary diagnosis, it really matters as we create our cohort. So the idea of should we only pick conditions in the primary diagnosis space, or worry about or not worry about that and pick any condition, was also up for questioning. Next slide. So what Evan really walked us through was different scenarios. First one was what happens if we include diagnosis versus procedure codes? Does adding procedure code increase the patient count itself? Does it matter if we include primary or any diagnosis? And the graphs that you see are really small right now, but what you really see is on the diagonal, there is a lot of overlap between patients who are both the patients who have any diagnoses versus patients in the primary diagnosis. There is fair degree of overlap, but the marginal contribution are patients. If we exclude the patients who do not have primary diagnosis and only focus on a primary diagnosis, there's a fair amount of folks that are not captured. If you go on to the next slide. So what Evan really recommended moving forward was, as we examine AA and aortic aneurysm rupture and aortic dissection, there's evidence that the code can be used interchangeably in terms of having single occurrence that versus multiple occurrences. These could be quantified in the free evaluator program. If you're moving towards primary positions, we could consider requiring additional occurrences from other evidences and consider profile review to confirm specialty who's ordering these diagnoses and procedures moving forward. Obviously, this was just one study. These clinical oversights would have to be done for all other studies as well. And closing up, I think that was the last slide. So the weeks forward, we'll really be going forward in week 5 to creating the analysis specifications and moving forward in creating the network executions and henceforth. We have 7 minutes left, I believe.
Thanks, Atif, for that quick overview of very, very clinical and professional information. So, yeah, I think that's all we have prepared for today, guys. If there's any comments, questions from the community, we're happy to open the floor for some questions. We have 6 minutes left now. Okay. Welcome back, Patrick. I hope you had some time to rest. I know it's really late for you. Thanks for joining us in person every single month, right? So, anybody else have any last comments? Otherwise, I guess one last thing I want to say to everybody here is, if you have data or if you have an area of expertise in any of the studies, please join. But among the studies, right, our favorite one is the fluoroquinolone ones, right? So please join, help out Chan, Jack, and Nicole in making this study go forward. Oh, I don't know who raised first. Mui, so you have your hand up.
I have a question, and this is probably to the study leads as well as Patrick. When is it too late to join? Is there ever a time that's too late to join?
So for the 4 Sisyphus challenge studies, we are trying to stick on a cadence to walk through the steps, generate the analysis, interpret the results, and publish the paper. In the case of the fluoroquinolone aortic aneurysm study, we want to make sure we have the results to showcase at the OHDSI APAC symposium. So we definitely want to make sure that everybody's in ahead of that. So we don't want these to drag on kind of indefinitely. But if you missed the data diagnostics week and you're only a couple weeks behind and you're thinking, can I catch up? Then it's certainly well within the plan for you to be able to do that, and we can work with you to participate. So I would strongly encourage everybody who's got data to jump in and participate. And if you're worried about catching up, I'll be happy to work directly with you to get you up to speed.
So basically within the next week or so, after that, it would be a little too late to join.
Well, so next week I'm going to do the tutorial on how to design an analysis. And the following week will actually be when we issue the code to execute the network study. And we'll have 2 weeks from then for where we really are asking sites to please run it and execute. So if a site wants to get up to speed, there's still a few weeks ahead of us. But after that, once we start getting to the point where we're doing a meta-analysis across the results we've received and starting to interpret and write up the publication, then we're gonna want to make sure that we know who's really in to be able to participate.
You just answered the next question. So the SOS challenges will end up in publications.
All 4 of them will be in publications, and actually I think there's a very high likelihood that we're going to have meaningful results that will go to high impact journals for those that are keen to see their name as a co-author of a good paper in a big journal. I think all 4 of these studies have a real likelihood of going somewhere important. So would encourage you all to participate.
And for those that don't have data, because not everybody on this call probably has data, they can still participate and be part of the publication with work like the protocol, the interpretation, the manuscript writing, or stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. We're really looking for people to want to participate. Like right now, a lot of the discussions about the phenotypes. And so it's great to have clinical perspectives on that. And we're also looking for folks that will actually help with preparing the manuscripts and like the background section and literature review. So there's lots of ways you can contribute even if you don't have data.
So one more question that I know somebody wants to ask, but they're probably too shy to ask. Okay. So I know everything exists in teams, but is there a possibility, like on the manuscript writing or the protocol writing, to actually have a meeting to talk about those, right? Because I know everything happens in teams, but sometimes it's a lot easier to collaborate if folks are on the call. Like once we get to the, in preparation for the manuscript writing, or even to go over the protocol as a group. Is there such plans for something like that?
So we're doing the tutorials every Tuesday for both the VEGF study and the fluoroquinolone study. And so there's a good chance to have a meeting. We're also doing office hours every week. And also each of the study leads has their own plan of attack for how to move forward with the publications. But I would encourage everybody to reach out to the study leads to figure out how they could engage and if there's a chance for meetings. So as it relates to the fluoroquinolone study, you've got Nicole and Chan here. And so they can speak to ways to get involved in that specific study.
Cool. So Chan, Nicole, Jack, reach out to those guys and they can get you involved, even if you don't have data. Cool. I think I asked all the questions for other people, or enough. You're on mute. So
Song, you're on mute.
he's on mute.
Yeah, so I noticed you put down your hand, Atif. Did Mui ask yours or?
No, I was just going to ask, maybe this is a question to Patrick. At what point do we lock the protocol down for further changes? Do you think that would be before next week?
It will not be before next week. So next week, I'm going to go through the analysis design. So at the point that we ask the sites to execute the analysis, we'll definitely want to make sure that the protocol is fully locked. So in 2 weeks, we will certainly be doing that. But next week, we'll be going through the process of making the various analysis design choices. And so in the case of the fluoroquinolone study, I actually think that the design is pretty straightforward. I know that the team still Evan introduced some topics about how to think about the outcomes that the group needs to consider, but I think from a statistical perspective, the design is pretty straightforward, but we want to make sure that we have an open conversation about that, which I'll be leading next week. And then after that, really, we will once we agree to the analysis design choices, have already finalized the phenotypes, then we'll kind of lock that in place in the analysis code that we'll ask sites to run. That will be the final thing that we'll move forward with.
And Patrick, this is just for everyone on the call. Once the protocol is locked down and you want to participate, the package would run on everything that's included in the protocol. You can't pick and choose, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the analysis package will execute all analyses that are described in the protocol. So there won't be any cherry picking to go on there. The good news is that you won't have to write any code. You really just need to be able to execute the package. The bad news is you don't get any degrees of freedom. We're really asking you to run the thing that the whole community has agreed to, and then we'll see how the results play out from there.
So if anyone has feedback, you have 14 days.
Right. 14 days until you can put in your say, or otherwise you just run whatever's the community has decided. I think that's a takeaway, last takeaway for us for today's call. We're 2 minutes over. If there's any other questions, we can take one more. Otherwise, I'll let everybody get back to their day jobs or to their sleep, right? We all need our sleep. All right. All right, sounds good. No further questions. Thanks everybody for joining today. Please join us on the weekly tutorials. It's very exciting to see the community and how the exciting discussions that they have among themselves. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Everyone.